I'm Sally Neville, and I was the team leader for the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Research Project, which was a one-year qualitative study commissioned by FCDO's Evaluation Unit and the British Embassy in Kathmandu. The research was conducted by a team at Adam Smith International and was commissioned through the Expert Advisory Cooldown Service, which is managed by DAI. The purpose of the research was to generate learning on how to include a meaningful focus on GESI within mainstream development programmes, and this is a short presentation to talk you through a summary of the learning from the research project. GESI mainstreaming has been used in some form for at least the last 30 years within the development sector, but there has been long-standing criticism of it as something which very often leads to simply token efforts within development programmes rather than a focus on meaningful results. However, it is still widely used within the development sector and is the main approach taken to contributing to equality and inclusion within development programmes. And its widespread use really underlines the importance of better understanding what makes it as effective and as meaningful as possible. And that was the purpose of this research. It was to respond to this need and to practically inform future work and to promote higher standards in GESI mainstreaming. The research methodology we used was divided into three distinct stages. So stage one, research began with a global literature synthesis, and this included a review of 36 documents from the global literature on GESI mainstreaming and in some cases gender mainstreaming specifically. The focus here was on drawing out evidence of what works to mainstream GESI, for example from evaluation and reviews, but also to look at current thinking in terms of promising practice. Stage two of the research followed on from that global literature synthesis, and this was a review of the BEK portfolio. And this involved looking at documents from a sample of 15 programmes in Nepal and also conducting remote interviews with those who were working on them. And the focus here was on understanding how BEK programmes had attempted to mainstream GESI in their work, and also to compare these approaches to those included in the global literature. Stage three of the research was rounded off with a set of deep dive case studies. This involved taking a closer look at a subset of those 15 programmes, so we selected 4 of them, and we used semi-structured interviews to better understand how mainstream efforts that were outlined on paper had actually translated into real delivery on the ground. Based on a review of the existing literature, we developed a framework for GESI mainstreaming, which I'm going to talk you through now. From a reading of sources, especially those which were published in the last 5 years, it was obvious that an intersectional lens needed to be placed at the centre of any framework which we developed. And sources consistently underlined that the importance of looking at overlapping forms of inequality and exclusion, and that being central to a meaningful approach. Beyond that, we identified a relatively consistent focus on what we have defined as 3 essential elements to enable effective and meaningful GESI mainstreaming. So the first of these essential elements is leadership and accountability. So programme leadership was underlined in the global literature as a crucial aspect of effective GESI mainstreaming, and a lack of progress in relation to GESI was often blamed on insufficient or inconsistent leadership, for example in evaluations. The emphasis under this essential element is basically not leaving GESI mainstreaming to chance, but rather taking a systematic approach to ensure that it is driven by programme leadership. The second essential element is capacity and culture, and the global literature highlighted that addressing GESI in the internal workings of programme teams made them better equipped to address GESI through programming. So the focus under this essential element is on making GESI integral to programme teams by ensuring they have the knowledge and the expertise on GESI that they need for mainstreaming, and also that they have inclusive team cultures. The final essential element is results and adaptation, and within the global literature an emphasis was placed on the ultimate purpose of GESI mainstreaming being that it should make tangible contributions to GESI outcomes. So rather than GESI mainstreaming as a process being seen as an end in itself, this shifts the focus onto the so what, in terms of what GESI mainstreaming efforts are actually ultimately contributing to. Although distinct, these three essential elements were presented in the literature as being highly interconnected and required in combination. There was no suggestion in any of the sources that a sole focus on any one of these areas was sufficient in itself, but rather that all three needed attention as part of an overall approach to GESI mainstreaming. And then finally, the global literature also emphasised what I've just put up as those three grey arrows at the bottom of the framework, which is that the wider social and political context, the funding environment and procurement procedures, and also the broader organisational culture within implementing partners, that these all matter and play an important role in either enabling or constraining GESI mainstreaming. Under the three essential elements, sources consistently underlined the value of certain approaches to GESI mainstreaming. And within the global literature, these were either confidently promoted, for example, through guidance and how-to notes, or they had been identified as valuable through reviews and evaluations. As a research team, we clustered these various approaches together into a set of what we have called as 12 common approaches to GESI mainstreaming, and we have clustered these around the three essential elements. We also sought to draw lessons in relation to each of these from work within the BEK portfolio. And in the following slides, I'm going to give you a very high-level summary of the lessons which emerged from the research in relation to each of these 12 common approaches. Approach 1 focuses on GESI strategies, and the lesson from the research here was that programmes can helpfully demonstrate and elevate commitments to GESI mainstreaming through the use of programme GESI strategies, and that these are especially helpful when they are linked to practical action plans within programmes. More specifically, we found that programmes that had used GESI strategies had done more to mainstream GESI than others. We found that GESI strategies were more helpful when they included an intersectional lens, when they provided conceptual clarity about what a programme meant by GESI mainstreaming, and also when there was a clear explanation within the strategy about what the programme was ultimately trying to contribute to in terms of equality and inclusion. We also found that it was important that GESI strategies were timed in order to have the greatest influence over programme design and ongoing delivery. So ideally, they were developed initially during the inception phase or even earlier, and then were revisited periodically throughout the life of a programme. The second approach relates to budgeting for GESI, and the lesson here was that GESI mainstreaming requires a dedicated investment of resources, with budget allocations for GESI needing to be explicit and visible. In particular, we found that it was important for donors to set clear expectations in relation to spending on GESI, both in terms of initial budgeting by programmes and also in terms of tracking ongoing spend. And also that it was important for donors to work with implementing partners to agree how spending on GESI would be calculated, especially when GESI-focused efforts had been woven into other programme activities and interventions. The third approach is about motivating teams, and the lesson here was that it is important for programme leadership to intentionally motivate their teams to address GESI through their work. And in particular, we found that there was value in programme leadership going beyond general messaging about the importance of GESI simply as a value, but instead taking actual intentional steps to motivate teams through some form or various forms of recognition and reward. And also that ensuring GESI mainstreaming responsibilities, which might be included in job descriptions, for example, were actually carried through to performance appraisal. The fourth approach focuses on diverse recruitment, and the lesson here was that recruiting diverse programme teams is an important aspect of GESI mainstreaming. and that this includes valuing diversity so that alternative perspectives within programme teams are shared, listened to and acted upon. In particular, we found that diverse recruitment brought in perspectives to programme teams which people cannot be trained to have, but which are based on a lived experience of marginalisation, and that these diverse perspectives can really help strengthen programme interventions. We also found that limited diversity, for example, in various parts of government, can mean that including women and people from marginalised groups in programme and technical assistance teams can be an immediate way of bringing diverse voices and perspectives into meetings and events. And finally, we found that it was helpful for implementing partners and donors to have a mutual understanding that diverse recruitment can take time and that it is worth adjusting programme timeframes to ensure. Approach 5 is about GESI expertise, and the finding here was that GESI mainstreaming, as with any other technical aspect of programming, requires GESI experts to be embedded in programme teams, and that they are most effective when they are in permanent roles within teams and in roles which give them status within the team. In particular, our findings showed that GESI experts need to be in place from the very start of a programme, ideally before they're even designed, and that in some cases multiple GESI experts may be needed within a programme to ensure that GESI capacity matches the scale and scope and complexity of the overall programme. Finally, we found that it is often unrealistic to expect that GESI experts will automatically come equipped with the ability to work across every aspect of a programme, and that in many cases there will be a need for some upskilling. Approach 6 focuses on partnerships, and the lesson here was that partnerships with GESI-focused organisations can enhance GESI capacity within programmes and can add value to the design and delivery of interventions. Our findings highlighted that establishing such partnerships can be particularly valuable because GESI-focused organisations already understand the complexity of issues in particular contexts. They are already familiar with the types of interventions that are needed and also the risks associated with using them. They may also have access to marginalised communities who the programme is trying to reach. We've also found that partnerships with GESI-focused organisations can enable programmes to make a contribution to longer-term processes of change within different contexts, and also that it is important to ensure that such partnerships are not tokenistic or exploitative or purely transactional, but that they are really based on a mutual respect and a two-way exchange of knowledge. Approach 7 is about GESI training, and here we found that as well as having a commitment to GESI, it is important that programme teams are equipped with the knowledge and skills they need to play a role in GESI mainstreaming. Here we found that organisation-wide GESI training provided by implementing partners is likely to be insufficient and too generic to equip a programme team with the specific skills they need related to that programme, and instead that GESI trainings need to be tailored to the specific programme and the interventions which they're delivering. We also found that it's helpful for donors to provide clarity to implementing partners that they are able to use programme budgets to deliver such programme-specific GESI training. Approach 8 is focused on the use of intersectional analysis, and here we found that intersectional and operationally focused GESI analysis could strengthen GESI mainstreaming within programmes by enabling barriers to be identified and understood. And in particular, we found that GESI analysis was most valuable when it was conducted on an ongoing basis and had been built into programme processes, rather than just being in the form of one broad GESI analysis conducted at the start of a programme. And linked to this, that it was most valuable when it was designed to inform specific programme interventions. Approach 9 focuses on expanding reach, and here the finding was that programmes need to address the challenges and barriers marginalised groups face in accessing and benefiting from programme interventions and resources. More specifically, we found that programs needed to clearly define categories of people who they wanted to reach in order to ensure they were addressing multiple forms of discrimination. In contrast, we found that very broad and loosely defined terms such as people who are vulnerable or people who are disadvantaged, without clearly defining what was meant by these, were actually unhelpful for donors in terms of holding implementing partners to account for targeting harder to reach groups. Finally, we also found that the importance of barriers being anticipated early on rather than programs just relying on detecting them partway through implementation. Approach 10 is about GESI-focused interventions, and here we found that mainstream development programs need to identify opportunities to include GESI-focused activities or interventions, and to do this they'll need to draw on GESI expertise and GESI analysis, as well as GESI-focused partnerships to help them do so. In particular, we found that targeted interventions like this are an important way to maximise opportunities for programmes to contribute to empowerment and wider transformative change, for example, which might lead to shifts in mindsets and norms, to policy and legal change, and also efforts to strengthen collective voice. And that it's really not possible to do this type of programming without at least some GESI expertise being in the mix. Finally, we found that GESI-focused interventions within a programme really need to be explicitly connected to other programme interventions and outcomes, rather than essentially being a distinct GESI-focused project within a broader programme. Approach 11 is about addressing additional risks, and here we found that it's important that programmes seek to understand and address potential risks associated with GESI mainstreaming, especially where efforts seek to challenge current power dynamics and resource distribution. So in particular, we found that challenging power dynamics and any efforts to disrupt the status quo in terms of gender dynamics tends to be accompanied by some degree of pushback, and in some cases this can lead to backlash. And it is therefore extremely important that programmes initially seek to anticipate and understand potential unintended consequences of GESI mainstreaming, but that they also remain alert to these unintended consequences and to risks throughout programme delivery. Approach 12 is about tracking progress, and here the research highlighted that addressing GESI through programme M&E is a vital aspect of GESI mainstreaming, and that this includes the use of both disaggregated indicators and also GESI-specific indicators. Although sex disaggregation is often the most common form of disaggregation, the research highlighted the importance of disaggregation by a range of other groups, and of this not being presented, the data not being presented group by group so that they're seen as separate, but having an intersectional analysis of the data so that there could be a more nuanced understanding of how groups within groups were or were not benefiting from programme interventions. The research also highlighted the importance of there being an explicit plan for analysis to ensure that disaggregated data is not only collected but that it is also used, and that it is then used to inform accountability and also to inform learning and decision making by programme teams. Alongside disaggregation, there was an emphasis on GESI-focused indicators and their ability, especially at outcome level, to help track what is and isn't being achieved in relation to contributions to equality and inclusion. We found that mainstream implementing partners can be a little nervous about including GESI-focused outcomes in their log frames and being held to account for progress against them, but that it is especially helpful to include them because they help to carve out space and create ongoing space for discussions between implementing partners and donors about the progress that is and isn't being made. If you'd like to read more about this research and the findings it has generated, then the following research outputs are available. There is a global literature synthesis report, which focuses just on that stage 1 of the research. There's also a full final report which outlines the details of the methodology that we used and also findings from all 3 stages of the research. That includes some boxed examples from specific programmes. There's also an extended summary, which is a shorter version of that full report. And finally, a GESI mainstreaming checklist has been developed, which is based on the GESI mainstreaming framework, which includes those 3 essential elements and these 12 commonly used approaches. It's a checklist which can be used by those who are commissioning or delivering programmes.